was a seemingly ordinary day when the notice about Lars Mittank's disappearance crossed the desk of investigative journalist Emma Larson. Intrigued by the peculiar circumstances surrounding the case, she felt an inexplicable pull towards uncovering the truth. Lars had fled an airport in Bulgaria, vanishing into the dense woods. There was something eerily unsettling about it. How a man with no apparent troubles suddenly disappeared without a trace. Emma decided to dig deeper, not knowing that this decision would envelope her in a mystery darker than she imagined. Emma assembled a small team to help her investigate the Eerie wilderness where Lars had disappeared. Joining her was Seth, a tech-savvy skeptic with a penchant for logic, and Olivia, a psychologist fascinated by urban legends and human behavior in the face of the supernatural. As they delved into the background of the case, strange discrepancies started to emerge. Conflicting witness statements, blurred CCTV footage, and a haunting sense of paranoia that seemed to linger over the airport grounds. The trio traveled to Bulgaria, feeling an oppressive sense of foreboding as they neared the forest. The air, thick with humidity, carried a silence so profound that it was almost deafening. Emma's instincts screamed that the forest hid not just physical dangers, but an enigmatic, almost malevolent presence. She glanced at the others, gauging their reactions. Seth's eyes darted around, scanning for logical explanations, while Olivia seemed calm, yet alert, scanning her surroundings for psychological clues. They had no idea what awaited them as they stepped into the darkened woods. As the forest swallowed them, the daylight faded into an oppressive twilight. The silence of the woods was occasionally broken by the whisper of the leaves, a sound that seemed almost sentient. Emma led the group with a purposeful stride, though she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was as if the trees themselves listened, their groaning boughs and shifting shadows keeping secrets older than any man could remember. The team set up camp inside the forest, their tents forming a small circle around a makeshift fire pit. As the firelight danced across their faces, Emma spread out the cryptic notes and maps she had meticulously compiled. Seth analyzed the scattered equipment, tweaking dials and aligning antennas on a cumbersome gadget meant to detect anomalies. Olivia watched the flames, deeply contemplative, her thoughts mirroring the twisting patterns of the fire. As night thickened, an unnameable unease settled over the camp, intensifying every rustle of leaves and distant hoot of an owl. Shadows crept closer, defying the reach of the flickering firelight. Emma's thoughts lingered on Lars Mittank's last known moments of fleeing, panicked, into these very woods. She understood the fear that had seized him, a fear that now seemed to tighten around their own hearts with an icy grip. Mysterious sounds began to echo through the woods overnight, strange, rhythmic drumming that seemed to pulse through the very earth. The investigators woke in fits, exchanging uneasy glances as they emerged from their tents. The others could sense Emma's growing dread. It felt like Lars was calling out to them, drawing them deeper into his unraveling mystery. By daybreak, Seth suggested focusing on the clearing where Lars was last seen. The team pressed on, navigating thick underbrush and serpentine paths that wound in disorienting turns. A wave of nauseating vertigo washed over them when they finally approached the clearing, open and sunny, yet possessing a strange energy that clung to their nerves like tendrils. The very light seemed to blunder its way through the foliage, casting distorted shadows. Olivia's unease mounted, her trained mind picking apart the irrational fear she felt. She began to unravel a tapestry woven from her own subconscious. How fear of the unknown gnawed at them all, much like it had Lars. Emma felt it too, a splinter beneath her skin. A growing suspicion niggled at her thoughts. This wasn't a blank void they were staring into. It was a mirror reflecting their deepest nature. That afternoon, the team attempted to record the peculiar phenomena. Seth's equipment, however, went haywire, relaying static and distorted sounds. Frustration etched across his face as every attempt to capture evidence of the bizarre occurrences met with failure. Olivia sensed the despair in Seth's defeat, as he couldn't rationalize the malfunctioning devices. She understood that this place operated under rules unknown to them. As dusk settled, they heard hushed whispers in the wind, a language they couldn't decipher, accompanied by fleeting shadows darting at the periphery of their vision. The air became charged, vibrating with an unnatural resonance that pulled at their very spirits. Emma's mind flickered with doubts and an overwhelming compulsion to pursue the truth, no matter the cost. With nerves frayed and their senses in disarray, Emma suggested a seance to contact whatever lingered in the forest. She felt Lars was a key, not just to understanding the disappearance, but to bridging their world with that of the unseen. Despite skepticism, they agreed, gathering in a circle as night descended, cloaking them in its velvety darkness. The seance began with a heavy silence. Emma, eyes closed, spoke the words of invocation. Her voice quivered, the gravity of the moment weighing heavily on her. Unseen eyes felt like they were watching, scrutinizing their daring breach into the supernatural. The forest, already quiet, seemed to hold its breath, listening with intent. The air around them chilled as the candle flames flickered erratically, moved by an unfelt wind. A resonant hum filled their ears, a sound more felt than heard, as if the very trees were vibrating with some ancient frequency. Olivia's heart beat in time with this drumming, a primal connection to whatever entity may have inhabited this forsaken place. As they continued, the forest responded. Ghostly apparitions seemed to flit through the gaps in trees. A shadowy figure traced its way beyond the light, so close and yet untouchable. Emma felt it, the presence of something both intelligent and aware. A sudden flash of insight struck her. Lars hadn't just fled in fear. He had run towards something, something not of this world. The night dragged on, stretching into a surreal realm of half-dreams and reality, where time seemed elastic. The figures and sounds of the seance haunted each waking moment. Exhausted but resolute, Emma urged the team to delve deeper into the woods, convinced that the answers lay buried in its innermost secrets. They advanced with hesitant steps, every crunch of leaves echoing ominously. The atmosphere grew denser as they pressed on. Layers of mist caressed their skin like tendrils of forgotten spirits. Emma's mind swirled with questions. If Lars had indeed been drawn towards something, what could grip a person with such fear and awe? Just as doubt began to knot her stomach, Emma froze. Her breath hitched as they stumbled upon an ancient tree bearing peculiar markings, symbols not crafted by human hands, carved deep into the wood, a silent testament to an intelligence as ancient as the forest itself. The air around it buzzed with latent energy, compelling and terrifying in its silent promise. As they stood before the ancient tree, a sense of clarity punctuated by dread settled over them. However, comprehension flitted just out of reach, like a whisper on the cusp of hearing. Seth catalogued the markings with his high-resolution camera, his pragmatic mind struggling to apply logic to the enigmatic symbols. They spent hours unpacking theories amidst the roots of the ancient behemoth. Olivia posited that perhaps the forest existed as a liminal space where the veil between worlds thinned. It was a thought as unsettling as it was intriguing. Emma's mind whirled from these revelations, her comprehension gradually knitting a frightening tapestry. Their deliberation was cut short by an intense pressure, a symphony of howling winds and growling earth. A primal fear overwhelmed them, echoing the very terror they imagined Lars had felt. The forest seemed alive, not just with life, but with sentience beyond earthly comprehension. In that instant, they understood. This ground was sacred, a crossroads of transcendent powers. The oppressive murmur of the forest rose to a crescendo as unfamiliar forces exerted their presence. In the midst of chaos, Emma suddenly found herself bathed in an unearthly glow, irradiated by a profound understanding. Or perhaps an ancient horror. Visions flashed across her mind's eye, images of Lars, seen from perspectives she couldn't comprehend, running and yet never retreating. An idea, more feeling than thought, gripped her heart. They needed to confront whatever entity lurked in these woods, both to rescue Lars and their own resilient spirits from the forest's malignant grip. Olivia, eyes wide with fresh dread, echoed Emma's thoughts. They weren't the first to step through these woods, nor would they be the last. As the night settled again, breaching the barriers between time and space, reanimation of shadows grasped, tugging at their resolve, urging a hastened conclusion. Feeling as though submerged in a spectral current, the team moved through the woods guided by instincts anchored somewhere between human insight and elemental call. Layered paths pulled at their subconscious, choices made not by free will, but by the forest itself. Emma led, compelled by the remnants of Lars' spirit that intersected her journey. She was driven by echoes of fear that had once overwhelmed him, yet now whispered promises of understanding, a resolution to the agonizing riddle. Her drive seemed telekinetically entwined with the forest's nerve. With every step, the winding corridors of trees danced closer, enmeshing them in a bewildering embrace. It felt like shifting realities converging on a singular point. Deep within the heart of this spectral network, answers awaited, the tangled lines of fate looming large. As they grappled with the unseen ties binding them to whatever truth lay at the end, the journey culminated at a clearing unlike any they had encountered, a haunting expanse where time seemed suspended in a perpetual twilight. An ancient altar, crudely hewn from stone, stood at the center, etched with symbols eerily akin to the markings on the tree. Emma's heart sank with a heavy recognition. Here was where the forest thinned, where boundaries ceased, and the immaterial sought form. Orlando watched with an eye for history and spiritual continuity. The weight of coppery air, thick with earthbound fear and celestial echoes, draped a silent curtain over their senses. Kneeling beside the altar, Emma pressed her palm against the cool stone, feeling the tendrils of otherworldly forces entwining each other past, present, and beyond. Emma's skin prickled as the stones thrummed with ageless cognition, challenging her human perceptions in a dissonant symphony of discovery and dread. As clarity descended upon Emma, urgency gripped her. She reached into a tangle of truths manifesting before her, and saw Lars not as a victim, but a conduit, someone chosen or perhaps deceived to bridge realms. The knowledge stung like an archaic wound, an eternal conflict between two worlds written here in this liminal space. Olivia and Seth were distant witnesses to Emma's communion with forces as ancient as the soil beneath them. They felt something stirring, an ageless force responding to Emma's resolve, a force desperate for reprieve, craving the unfinished stories of both Lars and this world. An unspoken consensus bound them together. Fulfillment required confrontation. They gathered their depths of courage to invoke the forest's spirit. As Emma's voice rose, invoking for restitution or redemption, ethereal tides flowed through the air, binding them to the living tale in which they had become crucial characters. The chant reverberated through the clearing, a melding of desperation and hope resonating beyond visible dimensions. The forest responded in kind. Winds whispered secrets, leaves shimmered with a phosphorescent glow. Each moment felt suspended, balanced on a knife's edge between revelation and chaos. Within this crescendo, a figure emerged from the darkness, a vision of Lars, not as they expected, but tinged with shadows and light. His form was both known and unknowable, a transient architect of the space they inhabited. Emma's heart lurched, pained by the reality of his spectral visage, but also inexplicably heartened by his presence. In Lars' unfathomable eyes lay a narrative unspoken, connections unmade. The reconciliation came from understanding. Emma had seen him truly. She spoke his name with reverence and urgency, reaching into the folds of time to touch the person who had vanished, now a radiant guide in their quest to resolve the timeless divergence. Their voices mingled in the twilight, Emma's heart binding to the forest's own pulse. A haunting symphony emerged, a harmonious rupture, where specters and humans cohabited under a mutable sky. Through Lars' watchful eyes, she saw an unraveling of time, a doorway not of wood nor stone, but of essence and intention. Olivia felt the forest yield, the revelation unfolding through a temporal lens that echoed eternity. Amidst this revelation, Seth deciphered forms and movements, as if staring at an astral map where paths entwined through known and unknown courses. As their chant reverberated onwards, they faced the inevitabilities of convergence. Emma was poised at a threshold created through temporal intensity and forest wisdom, a place complex in its simplicity, created by endless ages of whispers and shadows seeking balance. The evening bled into morning as the world folded into an enigmatic harmony. The forest, once a specter to be feared, now breathed calmly with the cadence of resolution. Emma watched as Lars' presence began to blend into the forest, a bridge that existed not just in memory, but in truth and spiritual continuity. In this quietude, Emma felt the warm boon of clarity. The sacred tether between worlds was both sealed and celebrated. The rules that had bound them into this fold slackened, leaving a palpable connection tempered through time and intent. As dawn reshaped the forest silhouette, the sense of ordeal slowly unraveled into a shared accomplishment. Emma, Olivia, and Seth emerged into a world both familiar and new, a venture filed not under loss, but profound discovery. What was once haunting now transcended specter, calling to them as newfound custodians of an ancient truth. Their journey within the forest had run its course, yet as they walked back towards civilization, they found themselves forever changed. The spectral image of Lars lingered at the periphery of their minds, like a guardian or sentinel watching over their mortal confines. Despite the foreboding silence lifting, an echo remained in the beating hearts of the trio. Emma knew they were to become keepers of the stories whispered through the rustling leaves, the resonant chords still threading through the ancient trees, a responsibility that transcended their initial understanding. The echoes of the forest sang in perpetuity, a dulcet symphony of hope and reconciled fears. They wandered into the dawn, each carrying a part of the forest's immortal tale with them, a testament that what was conceived as paranoia now endowed them with breathtaking insight.